A big game hunting dream vacation to the Arctic Circle in Canada went from heaven to disaster in one moment on August 26, 2001. For experienced big game bow hunters, Paul Brunner from Montana and Doug Otte from Nebraska, who were two of 6 hunters on a musk-ox expedition north of the Arctic Circle in Nunavut, Canada. They went on a trip to the Cambridge Bay area of Nunavut province, north of the Arctic Circle, that was sold to them in the United States by Canada North Outfitters from Ottawa. Canada North provided the housing, food, a cook, and other provisions during this 10-day hunt for musk ox. The 2 cabins in which the hunters lived were made of plywood and had neither a fire extinguisher nor a fire axe, contrary to Canadian law. The Coleman camp stove provided by Canada North flamed fitfully each time it was used, and the storage of the cooking fuel, naphtha, was not carefully stored in red canisters. Sometimes it was stored in containers marked water. One of the hunters, Jerry Hampson from Lancaster, Ohio, filled a pot with liquid from an unmarked jug and placed it on the Coleman stove to heat up bath water at the end of the day. When Canada North's cook adjusted the flame on the stove, flames flared and suddenly engulfed the pot, which quickly spread from the pot to other parts of the cabin. Hampson grabbed a red container containing a clear liquid and dumped it on the flames, thinking it was water. But instead, the liquid was naphtha, which caused an explosion and turned the cabin into an inferno, trapping Brunner, Hampson, and Otte. All 3 caught on fire and believed they were going to die. They were trapped inside. Otte, on fire, escaped through a window after someone outside threw a rock, smashing it. That caused the door to open, and Brunner, also on fire, crawled through the flames on his hands and feet to safety. Tragically, Hampson died from his injuries. Both Brunner and Otte suffered horrible burns that left permanent impairments. The case against Canada North was brought in Ohio since it did business in Ohio. Today, the Insider Exclusive presents Dream Vacations Gone Bad, the Paul Brunner and Doug Otte story, and how their lawyer Bob Palmer at the law firm of Robert Gray Palmer Company, LPA, got justice for Paul and Doug and their families. Litigating on behalf of travelers who have been seriously injured in exotic and distant locations can be very challenging indeed. Where and who, for example, are the viable and liable defendants in real-life vacation disasters? The marketing and sales of vacations involve complex marketing systems which include suppliers, both domestic and foreign, wholesalers and tour operators, travel agents, and informal travel promoters. Often the negligence of a foreign supplier, hotel, parasailing operator, horse or camel stable, tour bus company, air carrier, or cruise ship will be the primary cause of the consumer's injury. Unfortunately, such potential defendants may be irresponsible, insolvent, uninsured, or unavailable because of a lack of jurisdiction or the U.S. forum selected is deemed inconvenient. Assuming availability, the potential defendant may be insulated from liability, in whole or in part, because of the application of foreign law, enforceable disclaimers and releases, the Warsaw Convention, U.S. federal and state statutes limiting the liability of cruise ships and hotels, and tariffs limiting the liability of carriers. Successful travel litigation depends upon the selection of viable defendants and the application of modern liability theories. The Insider Exclusive discusses the rights of Americans while traveling to exotic locations and the liability of tour operators and air carriers for the tour participants' injuries sustained in these foreign destinations. Bob Palmer has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Columbus, in Ohio, and in America. Bob has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. Bob is listed among Ohio's top lawyers. He is cited in the publication Ohio Super Lawyers each year from 2004 to 2011. Since 1993, he was cited in the Best Lawyers in America and in the National Bar Register of Preeminent Lawyers in Medical Malpractice and Personal Injury. Best Lawyers named Bob its 2011 Lawyer of the Year for Personal Injury Litigation in Columbus, Ohio. Bob is a fellow in the American College of Trial Lawyers His amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Columbus, Ohio, at the law firm of Robert Gray Palmer. It is my great pleasure to introduce Bob Palmer to the show. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thanks, Steve.
Tell us a little bit about your firm. There's a lot of different types of law a lawyer can practice. You can work for Exxon, you can work for IBM, you know, they pay well, et cetera, but you choose a harder road, and that is representing little guys. Why?
I grew up that way, I guess. My family was very service-oriented to other people, and I picked up the David and Goliath story early on.
When cases are brought to you, how do you, and you must have a lot of people refer cases to you, how do you determine, what is the criteria, let's say the 2 or 3 most important things that you look at before you decide to take a case?
I look at the plaintiff, the person who wants to bring the lawsuit, and talk to them for a long time about why they want to do it, what the goals are, what they hope to achieve. And obviously you look at the people you're going to sue, and can I accomplish what you want me to achieve?
In other words, are they a viable defendant?
Exactly. Exactly.
When you say you look at the client to determine whether this is the right kind of person that you want to represent, the goals that they want to achieve, what are the right answers?
The right answers are pretty simple. There are people out there who are just looking to make a quick buck, and they'll lie to you. I mean, I've been down that road, and you find out somebody's lying to you, they're out the door. So I'm looking for who the person is and how they'll come across. From the initial impression they give me, that's the impression the jury's going to get. And so I need to assess that in determining whether I want to try the case or not, or ultimately try the case, or try and get it settled.
Today we are here because you represented a couple of hunters who took a trip up to the Arctic. They are U.S. citizens. They were solicited by a Canadian company. Tell us what happened and some of the challenges that you faced in pursuing this case.
There's a company out of Ottawa, Canada called Canada North. It's been around for a long time, and they arrange these big game hunting trips about which I knew nothing. I'm not a hunter. And so that was one of the interesting challenges for me, I'd have to learn about that. They solicit U.S. citizens all around the country, and including Ohio, for various trips. So this happened to be a muskox trip up in Cambridge Bay, which up by the Arctic Circle in Nunavut Province, Canada, a long way from here. Paul Brunner and Doug Otte. Doug's from Nebraska, Paul's from Montana, lives in Montana half the year, lives in New Zealand. The other half is a world-renowned bow hunter. Makes all his own equipment, speaks, writes, incredible guy. Doug was a friend of his, and they ended up on this trip together with some people from Ohio. And they were housed in plywood cabins. The outfitter had a cook up there who also was responsible. Faulty stoves, flamed. The actual pot that one of the hunters put on the stove one day caught on fire because there was a mixture of...
It was mislabeled.
It was mislabeled. There's probably naphtha in it they used for the gas for the stove. Caught on fire, then caught on the cabin. And this hunter mistakenly grabbed a can of gas and threw it on the flames, thinking it was water. And sadly, he died in the fire. And this inferno erupted and trapped Otte and Brunner and this man Hansen. They all got out. Hansen later died, and Paul and Doug were very seriously burned.
And you represented Paul and Doug?
Yes.
And now you have some real big legal challenges here, don't you?
Really big legal challenges.
What were they, and what did you have to prove, or how did you overcome that?
Well, you start, the basic notion in both the Canadian system and the U.S. system is you have to sue somebody where they are. And so we either had to sue the outfitter in Ottawa, or they would say, you have to sue us in Nunavut. And so you're looking at a potential...
None of it's part of Canada, right?
Yes, it was just newly a province at that point, actually. But they had a jury system and all that, but the Inuit Indians, who basically populate that area, who are hired by the outfitter to run their gigs, would likely be the jury.
Right.
And so we really didn't want anything to do with none of it in that sense, because we didn't think our guys could get a fair trial. Obviously, I'm not a Canadian lawyer, and so one of the other issues was, since this man Hansen was from Ohio, just south of Columbus here, that threw the gas onto the fire that caused the fire, we had an independent claim against him. And so we filed the lawsuit in United States District Court here in Columbus, because he lived in that jurisdiction against his estate,
right,
and as well as the Canadian outfitter. And then the fight began on whether we could succeed against the Canadian outfitter here as opposed to Canada.
And your theory was what's called the long-arm statute in
Yes.
Ohio, meaning that if you are soliciting people here in this jurisdiction, you are liable and responsible for anything that happens as a result of any business transaction, correct?
That is the notion, and the Ohio courts have favored business to the extent that if the contacts with Ohio aren't what lead to the injury, then they say we don't have jurisdiction. There are a couple exceptions. We were fighting over these exceptions in the trial court here to try and get jurisdiction over them.
And what was the result of that fighting with the court?
We lost at the trial court level. We appealed that to first with the magistrate judge, and we appealed that to the district judge. He affirmed the magistrate, and then we appealed that to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, who then was faced with the challenge of interpreting what the Ohio Supreme Court would do with this case. In the federal system, they have to apply the Ohio law, but they have to say, well, they haven't really decided this issue. What do we think they're going to do? And they decided that they would not find jurisdiction, and so the Canadian lawsuits then became a major factor in how we were going to try and get this case resolved for our clients.
So you had to go to Canada, you had to file lawsuits up there, you had to hire lawyers that could practice in that jurisdiction, correct?
Yes, and I also had to go to Canada to take the deposition of this outfitter. Very cold day in Ottawa in January, as I recall. And so we all went up there to do that. We aligned ourselves with some Canadian lawyers who were keeping their cases at bay. We had to meet the statute of limitations up there, which was different. And so it was a real juggling act. Actually, it was longer, and so we were trying to figure out how we could do this.
And as a result of the ongoing case in Canada and pursuing the appellate process here in the United States, what was the end result?
The end result was favorable for Doug and Paul. What ended up happening, in essence, was that we were blaming the guy who threw the gas on. That guy's estate was blaming the outfitter, and so we ended up doing what we lawyers call a global settlement. That is, we were able to take the insurance money that was available through the estate, which is basically a homeowner's policy, and then the policy that the outfitter had in Canada, and we managed to fashion a settlement for all the people concerned.
As a result of this case, have foreign companies changed the way they do business here in foreign jurisdictions, like in Ohio, for example?
I think the law is evolving in that regard. I think even though the internet was involved in this case, solicitations and that type of thing, the case law about internet dealings with people is becoming more and more favorable to the people in this case would be in Ohio. Now, Doug and Paul obviously weren't in Ohio, but the Ohio connection for them was they were on a trip that was purchased in Ohio.
And a lot of their brochures say things like, we are experienced, we've been there, done that before.
Absolutely.
This is a safe trip. The tour company. Now, does all that help in establishing some sort of responsibility?
Absolutely. It would have been absolutely critical for us had we been able to prove the case here in Ohio. We thought we could get a fair shake in Ohio with the jury in the federal district court here because they're from out of state. You know, Canada's obviously not from here as well, and there was that nexus of connection that I've tried to draw together by getting some Ohio doctors involved as well.
There are many Americans that take trips abroad to exotic locations, and a lot of the companies that they buy these tours from, these trips, are foreign-based. Some of your cruise lines, for example. What should Americans beware of when they buy a tour package from a foreign-based company?
Read the contract.
Okay.
I bet it will say either that there's no claim that can be made because you're waiving all your rights, or that you're agreeing to submit it to an arbitration process, probably not convenient to you.
Meaning in a different jurisdiction?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a very tough situation,
Right.
but with international treaties that come into play, there are things in a given situation that you can do.
Yeah. What is the response when a person gets injured, an American traveler gets injured overseas on a tour? What is the responsibility of that tour operator generally?
If something that the tour operator did cause the injury, then the question becomes what country's law applies.
Yeah.
If you determine the United States law applies for some reason, then typically tort law would say they're responsible for injuries that they cause. But depending on what foreign country in which it happens,
Yeah.
depending on what the contract says about what foreign country's law applies, it could be a whole different ballgame.
What is the test for determining whether a foreign-based company has liability in this jurisdiction or any jurisdiction in the United States?
Well, you know, we've had a lot of cases where foreign countries have been sued in this country for one reason or another. Those are frequently based not only upon their activities, but upon the treaties that exist.
Yeah.
and the international law that everybody agrees would apply to that situation.
Right.
Sometimes the contracts on these tour situations will say this treaty applies or that treaty applies. And you really have to look at each one individually.
And what do these treaties say?
Many of them will say, in this situation, then if something bad happens, the laws of this nation will apply to these disputes. If the treaty doesn't address that, then you're looking at the contract involved. And the contract could say that if it's a French company or whatever, that the laws of France apply.
Right.
And that may or may not provide recovery.
When you initially said this was kind of an interesting case because I had to learn totally about these kinds of trips, these hunting trips,
Right.
and that sort of thing. What did you learn about a lot of the hunting expeditions that are out there?
I learned that these men that do this are incredible people, with incredible amounts of bravery and verve and dedication to the manner. These were bow hunters, not rifle hunters. The manner in which they do their passion. It's pretty remarkable to me as a non-hunter to think about going up against a 2-ton muskox with an arrow. That struck me. And it's an arrow I made, and it's a bow I made.
Oh, they make their own arrows?
Yes.
They do?
And I'm relying, this is self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
It harkens back to the frontier, it seems to me.
But I would imagine that they don't eat these muskox, do they?
They can ship it back.
Do they?
Some of them do.
They're mainly there for the trophy horns.
Yeah,
right?
they're there for the hunt.
Did you learn, are there any tour operators that Americans should avoid? Like from any countries? Let's if you want to name names, that's great, because this show is about information.
Right.
But are there any tour operators that operate out of, let's say, less than wonderful jurisdictions, if you will?
Right.
Are there?
I'm sure there are. I became aware of basically the story is this, I think, and that is to do your due diligence. And I think there are a lot, especially in this economy, there are a lot of tour operators who are offering the best deal in town.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as we all know, what you pay, you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
And so you really need to examine what they have on the ground wherever your trip's going to be.
Yeah, I see that a lot of affluent people take what's called eco tours.
Indeed.
And they're based in Costa Rica, they're based, in Honduras, they're based in Latin America. And because they're based in those countries, usually an American citizen, if they get injured or something happens, their claim is almost worthless, isn't it?
because it's in those countries.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And those countries have a different system than we do, and certainly different philosophies about how you can recover or what you can recover.
So you are promoting tours in the United States only?
Not at all. I'm an adventurer at heart too. I just am not a hunter.
Yeah.
So
how are Paul and Doug doing these days?
they're doing pretty well. They both had very severe burns, and Paul in particular had some injuries to his hands, which limited his ability to make his equipment and his bows for a very long time, and that's come back very slowly. And Doug had a serious arm injury with a nerve condition that prevented him from being active for a long time.
Again,
but they're real men. They're back at it.
Good. When you look at a case, going back to that same question, what was it that impressed you so much about Paul and Doug to take on this case?
Was these guys' attitudes. They had been through this incredible ordeal in this inferno. They both thought they were going to die. Doug escaped only because somebody on the outside threw a rock through a window that broke it, that changed the airflow, which caused the door to come open, which enabled Paul to scoot out through the flames on his hands and knees, and Doug dove through the window to, and yet they took that experience and they meshed it with their passion, and they're still at it.
Good. I am sure there's a lot of tour operators as a result of this case and global settlements like this that are now looking at their business model a little bit differently.
I hope so.
Because they don't want to run into you. And I want to thank you very much for being on this program, because of your diligence, your determination. There are people out there that now have what they need. And thank you for sharing with us.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.